Here is James Cameron.
You never really get an opportunity. You take an opportunity. If you're going to do something, you have to do it all the way, and you have to just put it before all other things.
I don't know about you, but I'm having a really great time.
Welcome back, everybody. James Cameron 101. Today is quite the podcast here. We are going to be talking Terminator Dark Fate with one of the screenwriters of the script, and very, very excited. First, I have to give credit where credit's due. I'm talking to our guest today because of a previous guest that I had on about 6 years ago, 2019, right as Dark Fate was getting ready to unleash into theaters. I was fortunate enough to be able to talk to Billy Ray, who is also credited working on the script. And fast forward now, 6 years later, want to kind of dive more into Dark Fate now that we've had some time to let it digest and find its place in the franchise. And so really excited to talk to David Goyer, who is, like I said, one of the writers of this. You might, his name is probably very synonymous with the superhero genre. You got the Dark Knight trilogy, you got Man of Steel, Batman v Superman. He's also directed films, Blade Trinity, The Unborn. So he is quite the worker here. So we're going to dive into this right away. We don't want to waste any time. So let's welcome our guest, Mr. David Goyer.
Thanks for having me. Yes. No. Billy's a friend, longtime friend. So he emailed me, and that's how this happened.
Sweet. Yeah, no, he was great. He was great. And when I look back on that interview, it's kind of crazy that it even happened. But yeah, 2019 is when I talked to him, I think maybe a month or two before the film came out. And now that we're 6 years removed, just wanted to dive a little deeper into it. How often do you talk about Terminator Dark Fate? I feel like it's probably not something that's brought up too much.
Not that often. We had a lot of hopes going into the project. It was, he might have told you it was supposed to be the first of three. We actually had broken a whole trilogy with Jim in the writer's room for that. And Jim, we can talk about how the whole thing happened, but Jim had called me out of the blue and said that he wanted me to write the first one. And but as a group, all the other people that are credited on the story, we were in a writer's room for 6 weeks with Jim. And we actually, as a group, plotted out 3 movies. And I'm really bummed that the second and third movie never got made, because that's where the really cool stuff was going to happen.
Of course. Before we actually get going here, I do want to, I have it ready to go here. I just want to play a little snippet of the interview I did with Billy, just to kind of, for anyone that, for anyone that might not have been able to check that out, and for yourself as well, just to, because I asked him, what was your role in the writing of it, and then he kind of described what he did. So just want to play this really quickly here. Let me know that you can hear it.
Yeah,
those 5 names that you see in the story credit, they were in the room in January breaking the story. Okay. Then a team of them, David and Justin, went off to write the draft. Whenever you see in writing credits that writers are linked by an ampersand instead of by the word "and" spelled out, it means they wrote as a team. So David and Justin wrote as a team. They wrote their draft, and then it was determined that I would come in behind them, and I was on the movie from October until today.
So there we go. So he kind of came in at the tail end there, which is really interesting how that always works out when it comes to when you look at multiple screenwriters working on something. And I actually never knew what he talked about there with what's it called?
The ampersand.
Yeah.
That's I can add a little more color. but that's very accurate. And if you want to know the way that I got involved, I can start with that. So, a few years prior to that, I had come in. James had been developing a remake of Fantastic Voyage, which was the famous film in which people are shrunk down and inserted into someone's bloodstream. And they had been working on it for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And I was asked to come in on it. And I remember reading the title page of the script and to see that, because it would list the previous writers, and something like 10 or 12 writers were listed on this thing prior to that. And they were all really good writers, and every single one of them the hottest writer that year. And many of them have since been nominated for Academy Awards or gone on to win Academy Awards. And I just said, you know what this title page, before I read the script, tells me, at the time I met with the head of Fox, and they said, what? And I said, well, there's no way that at least a third of these writers didn't write some amazing script. So what that tells me is the problem was not them, it's you, the studio, as to why this movie didn't get made. There's just no way, because it was just like every single big name writer, that you've heard of. And I said, I don't want to be like number 13 on the list of people, which by the way, I am now. And so I said, I'll write an outline. I don't want to write a script because I don't think this is ever going to get made. And I wrote an outline, and then they gave it to Jim, and he really liked it. And we had a meeting, and it was me and the head of Fox and a couple other producers and Jim at his house. It's the first time I met. And well, second time. I actually met him in film school when he premiered Terminator, which we can talk about later. But anyway, and we were talking about the script or the outline. He really liked it. And but he had some questions, and I remember he raised a particular question, and I said, I don't think that'll work, Jim. And it was almost like you could hear a record scratch, and all the Fox executives, oh shit. And he said, why? And I don't remember the exact question, but I told him my answer, and he thought about it, and he said, I think you're right. And my point is, and this is why we hit it off, is Jim has this reputation, or he certainly originally did, of like, you don't disagree with him, you don't. And that's not true at all. If you can back up your position, he loves it if you disagree with him. He just has, a lot of strong opinions. And so we developed working on this movie that at the time Guillermo del Toro was going to direct. And we got the script to a place that he was really happy with, and everyone was really happy with. And at the last minute, Guillermo backed out to do something else, and which was a bummer. But anyway, flash forward a few months later, and he called me up, and he said, hey, I'm rebooting Terminator. I'm going to be in the room for the first time. I want to do new movies. I want to do a writer's room for 6 weeks with a number of writers, but he said, I want you to write the first one. And I was really honored, and I was like, yeah, sure. And at the time I said, I'd like to bring in a friend of mine, Justin Rhodes, to work on it as well. And he agreed. And so we had this pretty great 6 weeks of, it was myself and Justin. Jim would come in like usually every Friday, sometimes more. Josh Friedman, who I ended up creating the Foundation TV series with. And then, God, who was the last guy? The guy that Jim had worked on Dark Angel with, Chick Egley. And so we were, we beat out these 3 movies, and he had said, I want you to write the first one, but at the end of the day, it was going to be his decision. And ultimately he said, yeah, Justin, write the first one. And we were off and running. The The problem, and I had a great relationship with Jim, and as a group, we would tend to, because I had worked with him before a bit, if we needed to pitch something to Jim that we weren't sure whether or not he would buy it, they would always pick me to pitch to Jim, because I had this reputation for going head to head with him, and Jim respected me because of that. And it was a great experience, because he was not a tyrant at all. He was hard-headed and very certain in his positions, but you could change him and change his positions if you had a really good point, and if you were up for really debating with him. And I guess the fly in the ointment was, and this isn't a giant secret, Tim Miller had come on to direct, and so he was in and out of the room. And to be completely frank, and I think Tim would admit this, even though I respect him immensely, Tim and I did not get along. And I often found myself disagreeing with Tim as to where the story should go, and agreeing with Jim. So sometimes Tim would be on the other side arguing with Jim and I, and Jim is an alpha, Tim's an alpha, I'm an alpha. And so sometimes there would be these very feisty, almost debates happening, in the writer's room. And Justin and I did 2 drafts. And we just, particularly Tim and I, really butt heads. And this is this has been the first time in my career, but it's since happened one other time, where I just decided I couldn't keep working with Tim. And so I decided I wanted to stop writing, which is unusual for a writer to do. We had another step that we had already contractually agreed to do. And it's fun. I remember I was driving with my wife and kids, and and I said to Tim didn't want me to leave either, but I said, look, dude, come on, we're like arguing all the time about this, and I can tell you what some of the points of contention were later on, but so he didn't want me to leave either, but I just said, I'm just not enjoying the process. And I remember I was driving with my wife and kids in the car one day, and a call came in from a number in New Zealand, and it was Jim. And I said to my wife, I have to take this. So I pulled over to the side of the road. My wife was saying to the kids in the backseat, be quiet, be quiet. And Jim was trying to talk me into not going either. And I said, come on, man, you know that Tim and I just are going at it. And at the end of the call, Jim said, yeah, no, I know. All right. I don't blame you under the circumstances. And so then, a week or so went, and they asked Billy if he would come in and work with Tim, and Billy and I are friends. And so Billy called me up and said, do you mind if I do it? And I said, go for it. I mean, in this case, I was happy to be rewritten. He's a great writer. I didn't want to keep going. And I felt that Billy, because he hadn't had maybe the battle scars kind of leading up for the 6 months or so, would have a better time of it. And from what I understand, then it was then sometimes Billy and Tim getting into points of contention with Jim. And so I don't know, it was a rough development experience. There are aspects of the movie that I really like, and I also know could have been, and there are things about it that I don't like. And it's not because of Billy. Billy had done a great job sort of executing it. That's probably more information than you wanted to hear, but there were a lot of fireworks in going on in that movie, and they continued on that movie into post-production, between, as they both discussed, between Tim and Jim.
So I have a feeling we'll, like you said, talk about stuff like that down the road of this episode. But I really quickly want to, I mean, clearly you accepted it because I assume the idea of it erasing 3, 4, and 5 and being a direct sequel to T2, that was probably the most kind of appealing thing about it, right? The fact that you weren't following those other films, the fact that you were following the legendary Terminator 2, but that had to kind of present a bit of oh boy, I have to follow Terminator 2. Like, did that ever?
It was, yes, that, all that, but also that the intention was to bring Linda Hamilton back, which everyone thought was really cool.
Yep.
And which was not a foregone conclusion when we started. We had dinner with her after we had written the first draft, and fortunately she was in, and we were all really excited about that. And I remember at the time thinking, she said that she was going to get in shape for the movie again, and we were like, how is this going to work? But in incredible shape by the time the movie happened. It was daunting, but the fact that we were doing it with Jim, I would not have agreed to have done it if he hadn't been involved.
Okay.
But since Jim was involved, he, I'm surmising, I can't remember exactly what he had said, but he didn't sort of love the subsequent movies that had been made. And he felt that there was more story to tell. And we were excited about that, and excited about continuing the story. And I think had we been able to make the full trilogy, it would have been a pretty cool extension of the the Terminator franchise.
Did you have a backup plan? Had Linda said, "No, I'm passing"?
No, I don't think we will movie.
Wow. So it literally rested on her.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Because, I know she had been apprehensive about it. And now I think she now she's like, if anyone asks her about it again, she's like, I am done with Terminator. I am
Yeah. But I think she's the best part of the movie. I mean, she's fantastic in it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly when it came out, and then in the subsequent years, it's remained my third favorite. So of course, T1, T2, I think those are unbeatable. Those are unbeatable.
Yeah,
but I do think this is the best non-Cameron directed sequel.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And it's crazy to think, had Linda said no, then we wouldn't be talking. But you go to Arnold, and Jim loves to always joke that Arnold was always going to be in it, like, because Arnold is like expecting to come back.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were writing, can you recall what exactly? Do you have an example or two of specific scenes you wrote? Did you write a lot of Sarah stuff?
Oh God. I mean, the way that, like I said, the stories, the outlines for the movies were written collectively as a group, right? With big whiteboards. With possibly one or two exceptions, I couldn't tell you who said what during that 6 weeks. I mean, it was, but I had written with Justin before, my friend. And so the way that we work when we write together is that we would divvy the script up into, 30 pages or so. Like I would write the first 30, then he would write the second 30, then so on and so on. And then we would swap and rewrite each other's pages, and then together sit at a desk and polish them. So it was, and in terms of what Billy ended up doing, structurally it was pretty much the same. I think it was mostly dialogue that changed in terms of what Billy was doing, which is why Billy, the other thing that you see in terms of when you have credit, when somebody gets story credit and not screenplay credit, it usually means it's because they did the structure, but not the scene work. And so Billy wasn't credited with structure because the structure still adhered to essentially everything that we had mapped out. And then the script. So if the structure is 30% of the credit or something like that, and the script is another 70%, I had done half of that other 70%. I think sometimes people take issue with the way the Writers Guild decides. It's an imperfect process how writers should be credited, but in this case I thought it was very accurate in terms of what everyone had done. I'm pretty sure one of the things that I came up with, though, that you would not necessarily have known if you hadn't seen the second movie. So do you remember the character Grace had all these numbers, get coordinates tattooed on her arm?
Yep.
So when early on in the process, we watched the movies with Jim, and I had remarked from the first Terminator, when the sort of time bubble first appears and Arnold Schwarzenegger is crouched naked, on the concrete. I had remarked that if you remember, the time bubble had sort of calved out a sphere. It had taken like a hemisphere of concrete with it. It was like a bubble, and then it's like vaporized everything around it in a sphere. And I said to Jim, why did it do that? And he said, well, because you can't, matter has to swap with matter, right? You can't just add matter where, matter isn't there in terms of like conservation of the laws of the universe. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. So does that mean that like that hemisphere of concrete that had been there before the T-800 appeared, did that go back into the future? And he said, yeah, I guess it did. And I said, so if I were standing on the exact spot where that T-800 had appeared, would I have swapped and gone into the future? And he said, yeah, I guess you're right. And I said, well, that's something that's cool. that gives us an interesting loophole for the future of the movies. And so what we had revealed, was that Danny had gone to save Grace and then, trained Grace in the future. And what the coordinates were how did Danny get into the future? And the idea is she didn't just live into the future. What had happened is at the end was going to be the second movie where Judgment Day was going to happen. Our heroes had worked out that another time bubble was going to appear at this exact spot, and those are the coordinates on Grace's arm. And so even as like nuclear hellfire is coming down and these missiles are coming down, Linda Hamilton's character, Sarah Connor, realizes she's got to get Danny to this specific set of coordinates. And if she does at this specific time, Danny will go into the future. And so literally like a nuclear warhead is coming down, and it's like, you can see the missile, like this would have been the end of the second movie. You can see the missile coming at them, and they're racing to get to it. And Sarah gets Danny like on the spot as all these Terminators, are trying to, stop them. And like the warhead goes off, and then just at that second, Danny gets to the spot. And then the tag of what would have been the second movie is Danny appears in the future, like in a lab, also surrounded by like 100 Terminators. And that was like the cliffhanger for the, that's how she got to the future. It would have been really cool. But, and then the third movie, the whole thing would have taken place in the future.
Oh, kind of like Terminator Salvation did with
A little
Christian
bit,
Bale?
yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's so cool that you thought about that tiny detail. Because I've overanalyzed the Terminator movies. I never even thought about if someone stood where the thing appeared.
Well, that's just the way I work. It's if you're doing, especially if you're doing a sequel or a remake or something like that. You're trying to work out, you get inside his head and work through the logic, because you're looking for these little loopholes where you can potentially add something to the mythology.
Right. And based on how you reenacted Jim's response, it almost seems like he had never even really thought about it, where he went like, oh yeah, I guess
he might have, but he hadn't thought about it in a long time. I don't know. I mean, he made the movie a long time ago,
Right. Was it because speaking of the time bubble in Terminator Dark Fate, when Grace appears, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like wedged between the highway, right? It's not above or below. It's like in the middle of the highway.
Yeah.
That's because that always struck me as an odd creative choice, not necessarily even a bad one. It was just, why did it appear in the middle?
Well, and again, it's been a long time since we wrote it, but I think the thinking was that Grace's people, the technology was imperfect, and maybe something about they miscalculated the way that slightly the way where the Earth was in space at the time, because the Earth is constantly moving. It's not just rotating, but it's sort of orbiting around the solar system. And so you have to factor things into that. If you go, into the past 1,000 years or into the future 1,000 years, you're not, if you're trying to get to the same place, you have to calculate a drift of X amount of feet, to the right or the left or up or down or things like that. But that just because I'm also a science geek, like not to the extent that Jim is, but that's just the kind of stuff that, we get into. And we thought it'd be cool that she sort of has to drop and gets all, fucked up.
Yeah, no, that was such a cool moment. And so, I mean, one of the things when the film was coming out, all this speculation of Arnold coming back, and I think Jim said something to the effect of, "This is a different kind of Arnold. We haven't seen this kind of Arnold before." Yeah. It had a lot of people speculating, myself included. Was there ever talks of portraying Arnold as the human prototype of the T-800?
I think we might have talked about that, and then dispensed with it. But we like the dynamic of a domesticated, T-800. I don't happen to remember why we dispensed with it. It's funny, what I should have done, because we had a person that was taking notes the entire time during their 6 weeks. And I have all those notes, and I should have, on my hard drive, I should have sort of gone through some of those, because, we came up with a lot of wild stuff and make it into the movie.
Well, that just for some reason, Terminator Genesis, the film that came out prior to this one, got a making of book. This one never got a making of book, which always kind of struck me as a little odd.
That's a missed opportunity, especially because Cameron was coming back.
Yeah.
I can tell you, it's funny. The very first version of the movie that we pitched, ironically, it's a bit like, I don't know if you saw Dan Trachtenberg's Prey, the Predator movie set in the age of the Native Americans. we were going back and forth about, you know, the purity. We were talking a lot about when you're rebooting a franchise and you're making, I think, the 6th one or the 7th one in a series, and the first couple are revered, and then the subsequent ones aren't so revered. It's a different task than if you're just writing a movie from scratch or adapting something, or even doing just a sequel to something, right? You're refreshing the franchise, and you're introducing that you're trying to appease fans of the original, but at the same time trying to draw in, you know, perhaps teens or people in their 20s that had never even watched the original. So we talked for a long time about walking this tightrope and how do we do this? And can we assume that the audience that's coming to the movie will know all of this? And I remember, I have 3 boys. And so I remember saying to my boys, well, I think the youngest was too young, but I said to them as they started working on this, hey guys, do you know what Terminator is? And I think my oldest was maybe 10 or something at the time. And he said, isn't there like a pinball machine game of that, like in the arcades? And I came back into the room and I said, we're in trouble. Because he watches all of these movies, you know, he's like an MCU freak. And I said, he doesn't know, he's never seen the first 2 Terminators. He doesn't know what Terminator is. And so I was one of the people in the room was saying, I think we need to do more work to introduce new audiences to this franchise. And different people had different opinions, right? And I just said, I don't think we should be taking it for granted that the audience will just show up for this, especially because the last couple weren't as good, and you know they had been sort of diminishing returns. And so, even though James Cameron is back, that will mean something to cinephiles, but it might not mean anything to the mainstream audience. And so that was one of my big worries: was we're doing a direct sequel, you know, to the first and second film, or a continuation, but I just had a lot of concerns that not all of our audience would be there. And so I was a big proponent of really stripping a lot of stuff back and going back to the basics. And one of the things that I love about the original film is it's just this, you know, the T-800 just keeps coming and coming. And it's actually a very simple story, aside from the time paradox stuff with Kyle Reese. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And so we had originally pitched a movie in which at the end of the first act, Sarah hooks up with Danny, and there's they get in a plane to try to escape the new Terminator, and it crashes. And we were pitching that it crashed on like Vancouver Island or something like that, right? Like way, way, way in the wilderness. And the whole rest of the movie was just Sarah and Danny and the new Terminator, and they didn't even have any guns or anything. And it was just like literally that. And there was a moment where Jim was kind of into, because we said that would just be fucking cool, right? Because it's like, it's just down to the basics of like, how do you, just through their wits, making deadfalls, you know, just having to survive. And there was sort of no more story than that. And he considered it for a while, and ultimately, I can't even remember why we didn't go in that direction. But a part of me still sort of wishes we could have seen that movie, because I just, sometimes I like the idea of just sort of boiling something down to its basics and just doing something really primal. And, you know, you're on an island, there's no planes, there's no trains, there's no cars, you can't swim away from it. And and you don't have any way. I think they had like one handgun at the beginning, and that was it. And just how are you going to survive? And so I think that would have been cool. But personally, I felt that the having arrived where we arrived with the film, I just felt that it was kind of ended up being neither fish nor fowl. And what I mean by that is it wasn't that, but it wasn't new enough as well. And it, to me, it felt like just a bit of a retread, with Sarah Connor and the Kyle Reese part. And then the biggest bone of contention I had was that I felt that there was a lot of debate about this. When we went from Terminator to Terminator 2, the T-800, the leap from the T-800 to the capabilities of the T-1000 were amazing, right? And it wasn't just the capabilities, but Jim was really pushing visual effects. That was the first, fully CG rendered character. Well, or maybe the pseudopods in the Abyss, where it had happened before that. The morphing and the liquid metal, all of that. And so my big bone of contention was I just felt that I think we called the new one the Rev 9, the Revision 9, but that I just felt that the capabilities of the new Terminator didn't make that quantum leap again. And I felt we owed the audience to do something that was really pushing the boundaries of its capabilities, but also pushing the boundaries of technology. And I just felt that was a sort of promise that we need to make good on. And I personally don't think we did. I don't know how you felt about that.
Well, I think it's almost and maybe Jim commented on this, but I feel like it's almost maybe an unwinnable thing to try to do, because it is so, you go from the T-800 to the T-1000. It's this next level kind of thing. And I think, when people saw what the capabilities of the Rev 9 were, it's essentially the T-1000 meets you can kind of say the endoskeleton, or if you look at Terminator 3, even though I know it's not in there, but it's the TX, that, like that kind of thing going on there. I think where you guys succeeded is the fact that it can split, and it can go off and do its own thing, and it's always in communication with, you know what I mean? That I think is a really, really cool idea that happened. The fact that it's a endoskeleton with a liquid thing over top, I think that's sort of where maybe the creative part of it is. It's almost unwinnable to try
look, I don't disagree, but I was saying we haven't gone far enough. I was just like, I'm not satisfied.
Well, I mean, that's great to hear that, someone that worked on it, looking back, is like, man, we really could have done something. Cause I think this is it's not Terminator Genesis. I don't know how you feel about Terminator Genesis, but Terminator Dark Fate is light years ahead of that film.
Oh, I agree.
Light years.
I enjoy the movie, and there's a lot of stuff in it that I really like. Dark Fate. But it's not Batman Begins. But that some, they're not always Batman Begins, for a variety of reasons. And, we had look, there were at one point in the draft, I was also pitching, and I'm not trying to be sour grapes or anything like that. I mean, there's lots of the movie that I like, that I was pitching that, when they're on that freeway, that big freeway chase at the beginning. I said, well, okay, you've got this endoskeleton with the liquid metal, but it's an endoskeleton, but it's not a living thing. So one of the things we should play around with is the endoskeleton moving in ways that it's sort of that uncanny valley, that in ways that humans can't, right? And so like we can't bend our arm that way, or you know, or our knees up, right, ball and socket. But there's no reason that the endoskeleton can't do that. So I was pitching for more scenes like that where it moves in just very, very uncanny ways. And so at one point when they were on the freeway, I said, oh, here's what would be cool is if the Rev 9, because it can't on 2 feet run fast enough to catch up, you know, to the truck that they're in. I said it would be cool if it goes down onto all fours and sort of kind of bends its endoskeleton more like a quadruped, like a dog or something like that. And so it starts running on all fours, but it still has that human face on it. And so the way it would move, scuttle about, you could see, you know, it could run 80, 90 miles an hour. It could jump from car to car to car, but it would have looked really, you know, creepy. Just because it would have been, you know, just moving not like a human. And so I don't know why we didn't end up doing that. I don't know if they did tests and they couldn't crack it or not. But anyway, we were just pitching stuff to raise the bar. If
That's so cool. That's so, now this is a unique kind of position that you're in. You're a writer and you're also a director.
Mm-hmm.
So what I really want to know is, you write this, right? You co-write this, and then you hand it off to Billy, and then Billy does his touch-ups, and then Billy hands it off, and now it's in Tim Miller's hand. And my understanding is Tim Miller has some authority in terms of let's rework this a little bit as they're filming it on set. They have, like, they can do that kind of thing. And then the finished product happens, and then you go to see the film, having written it, but not directed it, but you are a director. Do you watch it and you're going, this is not how I would have directed this?
Well, the short answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I think, you know, I write, I direct, I produce. Sometimes I write things that I produce and I don't direct. I've directed things written. It just depends, right? So on this job, it was very clear to me from the beginning that I was a writer, period. Like, that I was not being a director. But because I have directed, of course, and I'm not even remotely as proficient in visual effects as Jim is, but for an average writer director, I'm fairly proficient in visual effects. So I did have, you know, I think some understanding of, you know, what we could pull off and what we couldn't pull off, and perhaps that, you know, a writer that had not directed before or had not worked in visual effects a lot, because of, you know, a show like Foundation, for instance, which I show run and have directed a lot on. You know, we will do 500 visual effects in a single episode, or something like that. But no, there wasn't any. I also had no interest in directing it, because there's no way I want to do effectively the third Terminator film and follow James Cameron. That just, to me, that's like suicide. I had no interest in doing that. So I didn't want that target on my back.
Well, I always say that's why Jim will never direct another Terminator film. He'll write, he'll produce, and he'll do that because if it's good, he'll get some credit.
Right.
But if it's bad, or if it's just mediocre, well, I didn't direct it. So
yeah. Well, yeah, he has that plausible deniability.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, look, but here's the thing. If Jim had directed it, would it have worked? I don't know. A part of it is, I just think that, you know, we all made this assumption that the audience would be there, that everyone would really care, that that Sarah Connor was coming back. And I just think at the time it was sort of like jury nullification. The audience didn't care. And that doesn't mean we couldn't have gotten them to care. But I think it's a combination of marketing. Maybe it wasn't the right story to tell. I mean, you can refresh any franchise. I mean, I just watched Badlands, which is Dan Trachtenberg again. I loved that movie. I thought that was fantastic. And I thought that movie works well, whether you have watched any of the previous Predator films or not. So it's totally possible to do it. It's just, we didn't successfully do it with Dark Fate for whatever reason. I think it was received well, largely by critics, but it didn't, and it wasn't a flop. It didn't do well enough to merit the subsequent films.
Yeah, I really quickly want to pick your brain on literally the 5 minutes it opens with, because that's, I think, really where, and I mean, I don't know if you had any part in writing that, but I mean, at some point someone had to know this is gonna like, we're pulling an Alien 3 here. We're killing John Connor off in the first 5 minutes. Did you write any of that, or was it? To my understanding, that's Jim's idea, but did you expand upon it?
I believe that was Jim's idea, which I admire, because what Jim was trying to say with that was, anything's possible now. Because if John Connor dies and doesn't live to save the future, now what? And I think as a writer, that's a really interesting place to be. Is you just, you've heard of this phrase, plot armor. And so the one character that you think in the Terminator movies has plot armor is John Connor. So what happens if John Connor dies? And the way that I happen to operate as a writer is similar to Jim, in that, Jim will come up with a very propulsive idea, and he may not know how to get to it, but it's, it might be controversial, or the people in the room would be, you can't do that. And I would start to smile and say, yeah, but that's cool. And Jim calls it writing towards something, right? Let's just say, he would just say, we're doing it. We're going to figure it out. We have to rely on ourselves to believe that we can come up with a way to make this work, because it's such a juicy idea that we have to pursue it. And I operate very much the same way when I'm working on my show Foundation, or, I will come up with an idea that is just seeming so crazy that seemingly breaks the franchise. And you think, yeah, but if we can write our way out of it, then we've really come up with something cool. And I love that idea of just having John Connor die like that, and just knowing that we were in a completely different future timeline. And I know some fans, were really upset by that, but I don't know. My feeling, if you're going to do a movie like that, like Dark Fate, and you're going to do a purported continuation of the original trilogy, I don't know, 25, 30 years down the line, I can't remember how long it was. Why not do something big? Why not do something crazy? So, and the fact that Jim was okay with it, I was like, well, it's sanctioned, it's cool. So
Right. Yeah. And then 2 and 3, was Sarah going to make it through all 3 films?
No, Sarah was going to die at the end of the second film. She was going to get Danny to those coordinates
and die,
and die, because a warhead was going to land right in those coordinates. So she was going to get Danny there, and then her story was done.
And Arnold was completely out of 2 and 3.
Arnold was out of 2 and 3, and then the cool thing with Grace, because she was going to die, but then Danny was going to hook up with Grace in the future.
Okay.
Which was also it would have been interesting. There's a lot of stuff I like in the movie. And it's funny when you do a Terminator movie, because coming up with and this was something that Justin and I did come up with, just the whole crazy sequence of them being in the transport plane and then parachuting out, in the Humvee, and then the parachute. They were pitching action sequences. And I remember at one point, Jim got really frustrated. He was like, you don't know, this is like a Terminator movie. It's got to be like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. So I remember Justin and I went off for the weekend. We're like, okay, they're in the transport plane, and then they parachute out in the Humvee, and then the parachute of the Humvee catches on the dam, and then they're dangling, and then they get out, but then they're in a river, then it breaks, and then they're in a river, and then they're tumbling around. And I remember Jim saying, now that's a Terminator sequence. Because we just kept on like adding to it, more mayhem, more mayhem, more mayhem. And that stuff was really fun to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the film is filled with great ideas, and that's why I mean, still to this day, I'll watch it. I refuse to watch Terminator Genesis, but I will watch Terminator Dark Fate.
I'm with you. Look, I agree. I like the movie. There's huge swaths of the movie I like. It's not a movie that completely succeeds, I think.
Well, I think it's also sort of it doesn't, I mean, for me, it doesn't affect the viewing experience, but I can see it affecting knowing if you knew that this was supposed to be a trilogy, it does wrap up pretty well at the end. It ties up. But I think in the back of my head, I'm always thinking, man, I really would have. And then doing this with you right now, because I'd never heard like what ideas. So like, it just makes me like frustrated that nothing that like, but then you just, I think last year, right over here, I have a Terminator 0 poster, the thing on Netflix that came out. I don't know if you checked that out.
I haven't checked it out. Is it good?
It is so good. It is so good. It is incredible. So I mean, that kind of makes it bet, but like that's its own thing. It has nothing to do with Sarah or John or anybody.
Well, but look, someone will reboot it yet again. I mean, it's an enduring franchise. But
Isn't Jim writing one right now?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I think that I will say this, Jim made, in my opinion, the two best sequels ever, right? T2 and Aliens. And they are perfect sequels. And I don't think that Jim gets enough credit as a writer. I mean, he gets a ton of credit as a big action movie, event movie director, but as a writer, those are the most perfectly constructed sequels, just in terms of studying craft, that they're perfect because he preserves what's great about the original, but then he turns things on its head. The T-800 is a good guy. Ripley and Nude and the Alien Queen, and I am in awe of the sort of just the structure and the writing, of those two movies. And I don't think Jim gets enough credit as a writer.
No. As we wind down here, I'm just really curious. If Jim came to you today and said, hey, I know we did Dark Fate, what do you think about doing one more go at Terminator?
Oh, I would do anything with Jim. It
would have to be with Jim.
Yeah. Oh no. If it wasn't Jim, I would say no way. But there are a few people like Jim and Chris Nolan where I would just do anything with him. It doesn't matter.
So even though the film was received, kind of in the middle, you still sleep well at night knowing, hey, I did something with James Cameron, and that's that. I mean, I got to work with James Cameron.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of reasons to do a project, right?
Right.
And And I think that I have often said there's three main reasons to do a project. Money. That's a perfectly valid reason to do a project. You bought a house, you had a kid, whatever. The artistic integrity of the project, or there's a specific person you want to work with. And sometimes, if you're lucky, a project will hit more than one of those things. But any one of those reasons is a perfectly valid reason to do a project. And I think you just have to remind yourself of why you're doing it. And so I will, I guess, end with this little anecdote. So I went to film school at USC from 1984 to 1988, and we had a class at USC on Friday nights where filmmakers would bring movies that they'd just finished but had not been released yet. And it wasn't the official premiere, but in many cases, often it was the first time an audience had seen the film, and certainly the first time anyone had seen the film prior to it being released. And the filmmaker, usually it was the director was there. Sometimes it was the screenwriter or one of the stars. And we had heard that there was going to be this Terminator, and there's this in 84 or 85, and with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. And Arnold was like kind of a joke at that point. I mean, I think Conan had come out, but he was still Arnold. And so I remember my friends and I debating whether or not we should skip that movie. And no one knew who James Cameron was either. Or maybe someone had seen Piranha, but that wasn't an amazing movie either. And so, so we go and see the movie, and with no expectations of what it's going to be. And we are just completely blown away. And Jim is there, and the movie hasn't come out yet. So he's not James Cameron, right? The movie hasn't come out yet. And he's there for about half an hour afterwards, and he's talking about it. And this was very rare, but me and a handful of other people cornered him afterwards, and we talked to him for about an hour. It was like three other students, and just asked him other questions. We were just so blown away. How did you do this? What are you working on? And he said, I said, what are you working on next? And he said, well, I'm writing a sequel to Alien. I have no idea if they'll let me direct it, but that's what I'm doing. And we're like, oh my God, mind blowing. Anyway, he was extremely gracious and talking about his craft and how the movie happened. Like I said, I spent about an hour with him, and I reminded him many, many years later when we were at his house talking about Fantastic Voyage that happened. So it really felt like kismet that I was ending up there, I don't know, 30 years later, working with him, especially working on a Terminator movie. So absolutely. I mean, if he said, I want to do another movie, but it's just going to be with dogs, I would do it. It doesn't matter, because it was just one of those pinch me, once in a lifetime experiences.
I love it. I love it. Before we wrap here, I love to ask every brand new guest on the podcast the same exact question. So you only get one. What is your all-time favorite James Cameron film? All others vanish and only this one exists.
It's got to be T2.
T2.
Yeah. It's a perfect movie. Everything is perfect. Many of his other movies are perfect as well, but it's got to be T2.
And then to do a little asterisk there, are you talking about the theatrical or the special edition, or?
Probably the special edition, but I think I prefer the special edition, but any of them I'll take.
Yeah. Well, look, the film has been out for 6 years. Who knows what the legacy of the film is going to be. I mean, it has a really cool one. The fact that I've said it, I don't know if this has dawned on you, but this is probably the last time we're going to see Linda and Arnold on the same screen together.
Yeah.
Maybe down the road they do something, but this could very well be the very final time. So on that note, it's it's incredible for that. But like I said, it's filled with great ideas, and I just want to, thank you for taking your time because I've watched other interviews you've done talking about the Batman films and everything, and I was very, very excited to kind of talk with you about something that, like I said at the top, I don't think you've really had the chance to really dive into a little bit. So
I haven't. Well, hopefully it was semi-interesting, but I enjoy deep dive podcasts like the one you do. So it's a pleasure, as a former fan myself, still a fan of all of these things, growing up. It's fun to do, sort of retrospectives like this.
Yes. All right. Well, stick in the studio. We'll do a formal goodbye, but we'll wrap it up here. Everybody, thank you for watching, listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you're on YouTube, do the thing you do, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And like I say at the end of every show, go watch a Cameron film.